This is part 2 of our adolescent physical development lecture. So now we're going to talk about sexual orientation. Your sexual orientation is a part of your identity. So even before engaging in sex, adolescents will fantasize about future romantic partners, whether the opposite or the same sex. So we see the same sort of fantasies in both homosexual and heterosexual adolescents. Adolescent sexual orientation is a very important part of their self-identity. It's something they have to come to terms with. So some statistics, an estimated 3 to 6% of men prefer a male lover, and a slightly lower percentage of women prefer a female lover. This is just an estimation because it's really hard to get an accurate count of this. There might be a lot of people out there who just won't admit it. Homosexual behavior is completely normal and natural. There is homosexual behavior in every culture, and we even see it in many animal species. So everywhere we look, we do see homosexual behavior. It is part of nature. However, being homosexual as a teenager can be associated with a higher risk for depression and anxiety. This is usually caused by a fear of discrimination or fear of rejection from their friends and their family. There's also a high risk of bullying for these teens, and that's associated with the rise of suicides in homosexual teenagers. Homosexual teenagers have a higher suicide rate than heterosexual teenagers. So gender preference, this is the gender someone identifies as. Do they identify as a boy or a girl? Gender preferences usually emerges in early childhood. We usually see preschoolers saying which gender they identify with. So transgender children will usually start saying in preschool which gender they think they are. A little curiosity and experimenting with the opposite gender behavior is normal and healthy for preschoolers and toddlers. They're going to explore the other roles. So if you see a little boy playing dress up, putting on a dress, putting on makeup, he's just exploring gender. That doesn't mean that he will grow up to be gay. It doesn't mean that he'll grow up to identify as a woman. So a little bit of gender exploration is completely normal. But we do start to see in preschool which gender they identify as the most. Gender identity disorder. This is still in the DSM, and transgender children may be diagnosed with it, but only if their gender confusion leads to emotional distress and functional impairment. So there's a lot of debate right now of whether being transsexual should still be considered a disorder. Is it a disorder or not? And this is a hot button topic that creates a lot of debate, and everyone you talk to will give you a different answer probably. Okay, risks in adolescence. Eating disorder. In middle childhood, we talked about how self-esteem decreases, and self-esteem is actually at its lowest at the start of puberty. So body image is at its lowest in early adolescence. Girls tend to have more negative body image than boys, and they feel more depressed about their bodies. Girls in our society are preoccupied with body weight and slimness, and unfortunately this doesn't just refer to teenagers. We will hear kindergarten, preschool girls talking about how they're fat and they need to go on a diet. It's a real problem with our society. And this is a cultural thing. Different periods of history and different cultures have different ideas of beauty. They have different ideas of what the ideal body type is. Even in our old culture, if you just go back a few decades, Marilyn Monroe used to be considered the epitome of what a female should look like. She was the most beautiful woman. And today, she would be considered plus size. So even historically, in our own culture, what is considered the ideal female body has changed. The majority of adolescent girls are likely to diet, and they're more likely to suffer from eating disorders than boys are. And the two most common eating disorders are anorexia and bulimia. Boys are able to get eating disorders. This does happen to boys. I think the number is about 10%, but it is far more common in girls. Substance abuse. In the United States, drugs are readily available to high schoolers and middle schoolers, and yes, even elementary. There are people out there who try to give drugs to elementary school students. So if a high schooler wants it, they could probably find it. Peer pressure, lack of self-control, and cognitive factors we'll discuss in the next lecture increase the likelihood of adolescents trying drugs or alcohol. They tend to use substances to deal with medical issues, daily tensions, depression, or even just because they're bored. They may also be imitating their peers or rebelling against their parents. The two big substances that they abuse are alcohol and marijuana. Substance abuse is defined as the ongoing use of a substance despite the social, occupational, psychological, or physical problems it causes. So you can use a substance without abusing it. Abusing a substance is just when it starts to interfere with your life, but you keep doing it anyway. Substance dependence is a persistent pattern of use of a substance that's accompanied by a physiological addiction. That means they have withdrawal symptoms when they don't get it. That's when we have a dependence. Other substances abused by adolescents include depressants, such as alcohol, heroin, morphine, sedatives. There's stimulants, nicotine, cocaine, amphetamines, and there's hallucinogens, marijuana, ecstasy, LSD, PCP. We see teenagers frequently using all of these substances. So some factors that may use them to, or encourage them to use these substances could be, again, peer pressure. They want to feel accepted by their peers. Maybe they are rebelling against their parents or society. Maybe they're just curious about the experience. They're trying to escape from being bored or pressure. If they're just feeling too overwhelmed with homework and sports and activities, they might try to go to drugs to help. They might do it for just pleasure or excitement, or they might even be imitating their parents. If they see parents who are abusing alcohol, then they're more likely to do it themselves. So prevention and treatment, many approaches have been tried, but it's not clear what's the most effective. The problem of relapse is high. Treating just the substance abuse may not be enough. We need to treat the cause. We need to look at psychological disorders, family problems, etc. We need to look at the whole system. If you remember Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, we have to look at more than just the disorder itself. We have to look at the whole system. So STDs, given the combination of a high sex drive, vulnerability to peer pressure, limited experience handling temptation, and cognitive factors that, again, we'll discuss next time, adolescents are at a high risk for STDs, higher than any other age group. Every year, an estimated 3 million adolescents get an STD. So some risk factors for this, they're engaging in sexual intercourse. So by the age of 19, the majority of adolescents have had it. They tend to, if they have multiple partners, they're at a higher risk. If they fail to do it safely, such as using condoms, they're at a higher risk. And substance abuse can actually increase the risk of getting STDs. So how do we prevent it? By education. Most adolescents aren't educated enough on how these work and how to prevent them. They need to know about the transmission, the symptoms, and the consequences of STDs. They need to be taught safe practices, including abstinence and condoms. But education alone is not enough. Many girls lack power in their relationships, and they're pressured into unwanted or unprotected sex because they just don't have the power to say no. So programs that are used to enhance the teenager's sense of control, help them with their decision making and social skills help. Also, treating any substance abuse can help them. Teenage pregnancy, for many of the same reasons we just discussed for STDs, teenage girls are at risk of pregnancy. So does abstinence only education work? If we just teach girls abstinence, does that decrease risks of pregnancy? The quick answer is no, it doesn't. We need better education. So here's a quest. Look up the national rates of teenage pregnancy. Find some examples of programs designed to address it. What programs seem to be helping and which aren't? I will post this on Blackboard. Send me an email if you want this XP. So the effects of early or late maturation. So first we're going to talk about boys. So what do you think? How are boys who mature early treated? How about boys who mature late? Is it positive or negative? Well, I'm going to give you some research. So boys who mature early, they tend to be more popular. They're more likely to be leaders in school. They're more poised, relaxed, good-natured, and their edge in sports and the admiration of their peers heighten their sense of self-worth and self-esteem. So boys who mature early have generally positive effects. There could be some negatives, however. Early maturation may occur before boys are psychologically prepared to live up to the expectations of having the larger body. So maybe coaches are expecting too much from them. Peers may want them to fight battles for them. Sexual opportunities create demands before they know how to respond to them. So in a sense, their body can be ahead of their cognition, and they're not prepared to deal with it. So what about late maturation? Some positives of this is there's an advantage of avoiding those early pressures. They're not rushed into maturity. But some negatives are they might feel dominated by the early maturing boys. They might feel more dependent and insecure. They're smaller and weaker than the early maturers, and they're more likely to get involved in disruptive behavior and substance abuse. However, there's always individual differences. I'm just telling you general trends, but every boy is different. Some late maturers fight their physical status and get into trouble, but others adjust and find acceptance through other outlets such as academics, music, activities, etc. It's different between every boy. There are SES differences. The benefits of early maturation appear greatest in lower income adolescents. For middle and upper class adolescents, they're more likely to place values on other achievements available to late maturing boys, such as academics, music, art, whereas in low SES, there's more importance placed on physical characteristics. So now let's talk about the effects for girls. So what do you think here? If they're early, is it positive or negative? If they're late, if it's positive or negative? Well, girls who mature early, there are mixed results, but it's somewhat the reverse of boys. For boys, it was mostly positive. For girls, it's mostly negative. Early maturing girls may feel awkward because they are the first of their peers to show the physical changes. They outgrow both their female and their male peers, so they're the tallest person in the class. And with their increased height and their developing breasts, they are conspicuous. So it's almost like everyone's looking at them. Boys their age may tease them, and shorter boys may not want to date them or be seen around them. Early maturing girls are at a greater risk for psychological problems and substance abuse than girls who mature later. They tend to feel less positive about their puberty. They have a poorer body image, and this is most pronounced in girls who hit puberty in elementary school. It's less pronounced in high school. Early maturing girls obtain lower grades, have more conduct problems, more substance abuse, higher incidence of emotional disturbances such as depression or anxiety, more negative feelings about their bodies. They tend to engage in sex earlier and have higher eating disorder risk. Parents of early maturing girls may also increase their vigilance and restrictiveness. And from what we've learned about parenting, what can this mean? If parents move to a more authoritarian style, think about what that might mean for the girl. And it could lead to more parental conflict. Early maturers are also more likely to be the victims of sexual abuse. So now, late maturation. So what do you think late maturation does to girls? Okay, do you think it's positive or negative? So I'm going to post these discussion questions on Blackboard because this was meant to be an in-class discussion. So what effects do you think SES has on the effects of early, late maturation in girls? Again, I'm going to post this up on Blackboard. Please come in to discuss. So that's all I have for adolescent physical development. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments here or on Blackboard.